Welcome, traveler. As night deepens and the world slows its pace, let this story wrap gently around you. No need to think, just breathe, relax, and let go. Before you drift off, take a moment to like and subscribe. And if you'd like, leave a comment with the current time and where you're listening from. We'd love to know where in the world you are. Now, close your eyes. Let's begin. Tonight, we're not diving into epic battles or royal decrees. We're stepping into two lives lived at opposite ends of the same medieval world. On one side, a king draped in velvet, surrounded by courtiers, deciding laws with a nod. On the other, a peasant waking cold, working hungry, surviving one season at a time with nothing but grit and calloused hands. This is about the gap, not just of power, but of purpose. Two people born into systems they didn't choose. Living days that couldn't be more different. One commands, one obeys, one builds empires, the other keeps them running. If this kind of calm, grounded history helps you unwind, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it brings you peace. You wake up slowly, not because you're rested, but because your back is screaming. It's a low, dull ache, like someone quietly grinding a stone into your spine. The straw-stuffed mattress under you is more mold than straw now. It hasn't been changed in years. And every time you shift your weight, dust and a faint smell of mildew puff into the air. You're sharing this bedding with your wife, two children, and something you're fairly sure is either a rat or a deeply unlucky squirrel. Either way, it's warm, and that's something. The roof is leaking again. You had hoped the clay patches you pressed into the holes last autumn would hold through winter, but they didn't. A slow drip has been plinking into a tin bowl all night. It sounds like a cruel clock. Plink, plink, plink. There's no fire. There was last night. You remember the glow before you fell asleep, huddled in your coarse wool blanket with your arms wrapped around your youngest child to keep her warm, but now there's nothing but cold ashes and the memory of warmth. Your breath fogs in the air above you. You don't have a chimney, just a hole in the roof that lets the smoke out and the rain in. It does both jobs poorly. Outside, something groans. Might be the wind, might be the pigs, might be your neighbor Edric already splitting wood. You can't tell. Doesn't matter. You sit up slowly, careful not to knock over the bowl of water you keep beside the mattress. It's half frozen with a skim of ice on the top. You break it with your fingers and splash it on your face. It stings. That's how you know you're awake. You pull on your tunic, the same one you wore yesterday and every day before that. It's rough, smells faintly of smoke and earth, and has been mended so many times the patches have patches. You tie a rope around your waist. The belt broke last year. Your feet hit the dirt floor. No shoes. You had shoes once, but the soles wore out and the leather cracked, and eventually you just gave up. Now it's bare feet in winter. It's not pleasant, but at least you don't have to worry about thieves stealing them. Your home is one room. No halls, no separate spaces, just a hearth at the center, a few tools hanging on the wall, and scraps of cloth nailed over the windows to block the wind. If you're lucky, there's a bench, a stool, maybe a single iron pot. Privacy? Luxury. The average medieval peasant lives cheek to jowl with their entire family and sometimes their livestock. A goat might sleep near the door for warmth. Chickens peck inside looking for spilled grain. Your wife is still asleep, or pretending. She was up with the baby again. The child has a fever that won't break. You've tried everything. Garlic, prayers, tying a scrap of holy cloth around her wrist. Nothing works. You don't mention it. Your oldest son is already outside. You can hear him coughing as he tends the fire pit. He's only 10, but he works like a grown man, has to. There's no one else. You grab a crust of bread from the table, if you can call it that. It's a flat board resting on two uneven stumps. The bread is hard. You dip it in the leftover water to soften it. It doesn't help. You chew anyway. The bread is made from barley or maybe rye mixed with whatever filler you had. Peas, ground corn, even sawdust. It's baked once a week maybe, and the rest of the time it sits near the fire growing harder by the hour. You glance at the small wooden icon on the wall. a crude carving of a saint whose name you don't know. You mumble a prayer, or at least the rhythm of one. Latin isn't your language, but the words feel sacred by sound alone. Maybe that's enough. A few moments of silence pass, then the rooster crows. Not yours, of course. You can't afford one. It's Edric's. It sounds smug. You stretch your back and hear it pop in 3 places. That's the morning song. You take a deep breath. The air smells like damp straw, ash, and unwashed wool. You feel the cold settle into your bones like an old friend. Time to start the day. Today, like every day, begins with wood. Without fire, there's no warmth, no cooking, no hope of boiling the lice from your clothing. You grab a dull hatchet and trudge to the woodpile. You're not allowed to cut trees in the Lord's forest. Technically, even gathering fallen branches is illegal, but everyone does it. You just hope the steward isn't watching. The mud clings to your feet. The ground never really dries, not in winter. Paths are just grooves worn into the earth, churned to slurry by feet and hooves and cartwheels. You slip once and curse quietly. You don't want to wake the baby again. Later, you'll check the thatch, try to mend the fence, feed the pig, tend the plot, maybe go to the village oven if there's anything to bake. But first, you always nod to your neighbor. He grunts in return. You both know this day already. You've lived it 100 times. The king wakes slowly, not from cold or pain or noise, but because that is the luxury of power. His bed is enormous, draped in velvet and lined with furs. The sheets are imported linen, so soft they barely whisper as he turns. The mattress is filled with goose down. Not just any geese, mind you, ones raised specifically for a palace. Their feathers are collected by hand. He doesn't open his eyes at first. There's no need. The room is already warm thanks to the fire that's been maintained through the night by a servant whose only duty is to keep it fed. Logs from the royal forest, birch maybe, or cedar. Something that smells faintly sweet as it burns. A gentle knock, then silence. Another knock. Then the door opens slowly. A valet enters. He walks quietly, placing a pitcher of warm water beside the bed. Another servant follows with a warmed robe. A third holds a towel. A fourth holds his slippers. Each one bows in sequence like a slow-moving clock. This is routine. Every medieval court has one. The king does not rise alone. He is dressed, washed, tended to. Even the act of waking is political. Who is allowed into the room? Who speaks first? Who touches the king's garments? Protocol is everything. It reaffirms the natural order. The king stretches. A servant pulls back the curtains. Sunlight pours in, filtered through stained glass windows in blues and reds. It pools on the polished stone floor. The king yawns. He swings his legs over the bed. His feet never touch the ground. Slippers are slid on before he moves. The robe is draped over his shoulders. He doesn't lift a finger. He moves to the wash basin. The water is warm, perfumed with rose oil. A towel is held up for him as he pats his face dry. He examines himself in a polished silver mirror. Not bad, he thinks, perhaps a bit pale. He sits. A servant trims his beard, another combs his hair. A third applies a balm to his hands. A fourth lays out his clothing. A doublet embroidered with gold thread, hose dyed a deep green, a cloak lined with ermine. And these are not just clothes, they are symbols. His garments are dyed with expensive plant-based pigments, woad, madder, saffron, each hue denoting wealth and power. Breakfast is being prepared. He can smell it. Fresh bread, honeyed figs, sausages, eggs, something sweet, something savory. It will be laid out in the solar room beside a fire and beneath a tapestry of his grandfather slaying a boar. While he eats, he may hear poetry or music or scripture. He may receive guests or he may not. The day's official matters can wait unless war has broken out or a bishop has arrived unannounced. He hears a knock at the outer door, a steward with the morning briefing, news from the border, a letter from the bishop, a request from a noble, a report on the grain stores. He waves it all away. Later, he sits in the warmth and listens to a lute player softly plucking a tune. Outside, the bells ring the hour. The sound is pleasant, faint, untroubling. The world beyond the walls does not concern him. Not yet. The king takes a sip of wine. Breakfast can wait. For the medieval peasant, breakfast was not a meal. It was a concession, a small pause between waking and working, a momentary comfort carved from the relentless pace of survival. It rarely came with ceremony, and it never came with choice. The hearth is barely lit, its fire still sulking from the night before. You prod at the embers with a stick and blow gently, your breath fogging in the air. With luck and a bit of kindling that hasn't gone damp in the night, a flicker appears. You feed it carefully until it glows enough to warm the bottom of a clay pot, balanced on the edge of a stone. Your hands hover near it, desperate to steal back the warmth the night took from you. There is no table, just a flat board across two stumps, already scorched in spots from balancing pots over open flame. You pull a wooden bowl from the shelf, not quite round, chipped at the lip, and ladle in a scoop of what might generously be called porridge. The recipe is simple: water, some ground barley or oats, a pinch of salt when you can afford it. There's no milk. Your cow, if you had one, died last winter, and the village dairy supplies go mostly to the reeve. The consistency of the porridge is closer to paste than soup. Lumpy, gray, with occasional husks of grain that crunch when they shouldn't. You tear off a hunk of dark, coarse bread, the kind made from a mix of barley, rye, and whatever else can be ground into flour. Wheat bread is for the nobility. White bread is a miracle you've never seen. This loaf is dense, heavy, and days old. You dip it into the hot mush, soften it enough to bite without breaking a tooth, and chew with the patience of someone who knows there's no alternative. Most peasants in medieval Europe began their day with something like this. The term breakfast wasn't even common until later centuries. Instead, the morning bite was a continuation of last night's sustenance. The word itself, breaking the fast, implied there had been a fast to begin with. For peasants, the fast never really ended. Your children sit near you, rubbing sleep from their eyes, already coughing. One of them eats with two hands. The other just stares into the bowl. You tell them to eat slowly, not because there's more coming, there isn't, but because it's better to stretch the illusion. Your wife drinks weak ale from a cracked wooden cup. It's thin, bitter, and lukewarm, but it's safer than water. The stream outside has a habit of killing chickens and children alike. Boiling takes fuel you don't always have. So the ale, brewed from grain fermented just enough to kill what the river carries, becomes the drink of choice even at sunrise. Sometimes, when luck aligns, breakfast includes an onion or leeks boiled with a bit of fat scraped from the bottom of the meat barrel. But this morning there's no meat. The pig was slaughtered weeks ago, its parts salted and hung in the rafters. Most of it went to the Lord as was required by law, a tax of flesh, bone, and survival. You hear your neighbor cough outside. Edric again, he's already on his feet, already working. You envy his energy. Or maybe you just envy his chickens. He has 3. You have none. Someone knocks on the door, a soft rap. It's a child, muddy-faced, barefoot, asking if your wife has any herbs for her sister. You don't, but she'd find something anyway. Dried nettles maybe, or woundwort. You trade for it. Half a heel of bread split in silence. The sun climbs slowly, lightening the frost on the sill. You stand, stretch your back, and wipe your hands on your tunic. The bowl goes back to the shelf. The pot, still steaming faintly, is saved for later. Maybe for dinner, maybe not. That was breakfast. And now there is work. At the same hour in a palace 50 miles and several universes away, breakfast is also being served. But here, it is not a necessity. It is a display. The king awakens in silk sheets, the smell of sweet wood smoke curling through the air from a fire that never dies. A steward appears to announce the meal, though the scents have already done the job. He is led into the solar, a private sunlit room where tall windows spill light across painted walls and a floor covered in hand-woven rugs from Moorish lands. The table is already set. Silver platters lined with folded cloth napkins. Carved wooden bowls glazed with colored enamel. Knives so polished they reflect the face of the man who holds them. No dish touches the table before being tasted by a food taster. The threat of poison is real, especially in times when political ambition is as common as hunger. A loaf of soft white bread made from the finest sifted wheat flour rests beneath a linen cover. This is manchet bread, prized for its purity, a luxury. Only the upper class can afford the fine sieves and careful processing that turns ordinary grain into something this pale and delicate. Alongside it, poached eggs from palace hens sprinkled with herbs from the castle's kitchen garden. Spiced sausages of venison and boar, cured and smoked in ways peasants have only heard about. A bowl of figs imported at cost from Iberia or the Holy Land, cut open to reveal their purple-red insides. Honeycomb dripping onto cheese, rich and soft, made from the milk of sheep raised on lands the king has never seen. He eats slowly, not because he is savoring the meal, but because he knows he can. There's no rush. A cup of mead sits by his plate, gold-tinged and lightly scented with herbs. He drinks little of it. A servant waits with watered wine in case his mood changes. Breakfast for a king is as much about being seen as it is about eating. Attendants hover in silence. Musicians pluck a slow tune in the corner. The steward reads aloud the day's agenda, petitions from nobles, disputes over borders, supply concerns from the coast. The king listens with one ear, chewing on a slice of pear poached in cinnamon. It is sweet. It is forgettable. Medieval royal meals were orchestrated events. Banquets and feasts were public, but even private meals followed rituals. Certain dishes implied wealth and status. The more exotic the ingredients, the higher the status. Spices like cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg were imported at staggering prices through Venetian and Arab merchants. A single sack of pepper might be worth a cow. He finishes half the bread, a sliver of ham, and picks at a pastry filled with minced apples and dried cherries. When he's had enough, he signals with a hand. The plates are cleared silently. A towel is brought for his fingers. He hasn't touched anything directly, but the gesture is expected. He reclines slightly, watching the dust float through the sunbeams. The servants step backward in perfect rhythm. The king's dog, a thin greyhound with polished fur, pads to his feet and rests its head on his slipper. He absently strokes its ears. Breakfast is over, not because he is full, but because he says so. One meal eaten for fuel, one for pleasure, one devoured to fight hunger, one consumed because it exists. The peasant scrapes the last grain from his bowl and drinks weak ale. The king throws away half a roasted partridge because it tasted slightly overdone. The average peasant consumed around 1,500 to 2,000 calories a day when available, mostly from bread and pottage. The average nobleman closer to 4,000 with far less physical labor to burn it. Gout, the disease of kings, wasn't metaphorical. Too much meat, too much wine, too little motion. But in the end, neither man truly wins. The peasant walks away hungry to a day that will demand everything. The king walks away bored to a day that will offer everything and ask him to pretend it matters. And so they rise from their tables, both under the same rising sun, one stomach aching with emptiness, the other aching with fullness. Neither truly satisfied. You reach for your tunic, not because it's clean, not because it's new, but because it's all you have. In medieval Europe, peasants didn't own wardrobes, they owned a garment. Singular, maybe two, if the harvest had been particularly kind. One for work, one for sleeping. Sometimes they were the same thing. Yours certainly are. It's made of rough spun wool. The fibers coarse enough to scratch your skin raw if you're not careful. The color, something between mud and old straw. It was once a pale brown, but years of labor, smoke, and unwashed sweat have darkened it into anonymity. The sleeves are uneven. One is frayed at the cuff, the other patched with an old scrap from your wife's dress. No one will notice. No one cares. Underneath, if it's a good day, you might wear a linen shirt. Smock is the proper term. But today is not a good day. It tore last week while you were hauling timber, and the tear opened like a mouth across your side. You haven't had time to mend it. Besides, linen doesn't keep out the cold like wool does, even if it's softer on the skin. You step into your hose, not like the nobles' finely woven stockings. Yours are closer to long woolen tubes tied at the knee, sagging at the ankle and held up by sheer stubbornness. One of them has a hole in the heel. You've been meaning to stitch it shut, but every day it seems less important than getting through the next. Shoes, if you're lucky. Maybe you own a pair. Old, cracked leather with twine laces and soles that have more holes than hide. Most peasants went barefoot for half the year, especially during warmer seasons. In winter, scraps of cloth might be wrapped around the feet, or you simply walked carefully. Today, you slip your feet into wooden clogs, crudely shaped and unforgiving, but better than frostbite. Your belt is rope. It used to be leather, but that cracked and snapped the same year the youngest was born. The rope is a better symbol of your station anyway. A looped, scratchy truth wrapped around your waist. No buttons, no zippers. Those are luxuries centuries away. Your clothes are fastened with knots, wooden toggles, or nothing at all. The neckline of your tunic hangs open, loose from years of wear. Your wife ties it closed with a bit of twine. She doesn't smile. Neither do you. There's nothing joyful about getting dressed when every stitch reminds you how close you are to nakedness. Medieval peasants had no closets, no drawers. Clothing hung from nails in the wall or was folded and placed in a chest if you were fortunate enough to own one. Lice were common companions. Fleas, too. You brush something off your sleeve and decide not to look too closely. In some parts of Europe, sumptuary laws restricted what peasants could wear. Not that you were likely to offend those laws, you couldn't afford fine colors or dyed fabrics even if you tried. Purple, scarlet, or gold, that would be illegal and laughable. You've never even seen gold thread. Your wife wears much the same. A kirtle, a kind of dress if you squint, made of scratchy wool tied at the waist with a cord. Her head is covered with a wimple, not for fashion, but for warmth and modesty. Her sleeves are rolled up. She's already working. The children wear hand-me-downs, so patched and mismatched they resemble scarecrows. The baby is swaddled in rags. There's a hole in one of them which you patch with more rag. The cycle continues. Getting dressed is not a transformation. It is not preparation. It is simply a layering of misery onto flesh. A small armor against the world, just thick enough to fool yourself into thinking it matters. But you wear it anyway, because to go out in nothing would be worse. In the castle, the king's garments await him long before he opens his eyes. Laid out by pages and valets, his clothing is carefully selected, inspected, and warmed by the fire, so that not even a thread feels chilled when it touches his skin. It begins not with the outer garments, but with the linens. Soft, bleached white underclothes made of finely woven flax fibers. Only nobles could afford such softness. The peasants grow the flax. The king wears it. First, a shirt, long-sleeved, smooth, almost weightless. It smells faintly of lavender, dried and stored among the folds by servants whose names he doesn't know. Over that, hose, snug-fitting woolen garments that cover his legs from ankle to thigh. These are dyed a deep blue, a color expensive to produce, extracted from woad and reserved for those of means. Over the hose, he is helped into a doublet, a padded tailored jacket that buttons down the front with small discs of bone or polished horn. The buttons are decorative as much as functional. Unlike the peasant, the king wears buttons not because he must, but because he can. Buttons are a mark of craftsmanship, proof of tailoring, a symbol of class, stitched into the seams. His cloak today is velvet, dyed a rich burgundy, lined with mink fur. The cloak drapes from his shoulders and trails slightly on the floor. A servant tucks it just so to avoid dust. On his feet, soft leather boots made by the castle cordwainer, fitted exactly to his size and shape. They have never touched mud. A sash of silk is tied around his waist, its ends embroidered with the symbol of his house. Silk is imported from Byzantium and the East. It travels through trade routes guarded by mercenaries and balanced on the backs of camels. It arrives here at great cost. He doesn't think about that. He just likes the way it drapes. Jewelry is optional but customary. A ring or two, a brooch, a clasp set with semi-precious stones. These are not for security or beauty. They are reminders to everyone in his presence that his body is sacred, adorned, elevated. While he dresses, attendants discuss the weather, his agenda, who might be arriving for court. Someone mentions a visiting dignitary. Another whispers about grain prices. It's all background noise. He nods occasionally, raises an eyebrow, but doesn't respond. He is busy being dressed. The final item, a circlet, not quite a crown, but enough to remind everyone who he is. Not too heavy. This is morning wear, not a state occasion. Getting dressed for the king is not merely about function or even comfort. It is a performance, a layering of power thread by thread. His clothes are stitched not just to warm him, but to separate him from the world, to make it clear that he is not of the same cloth. And when he steps into the hall, robes trailing, hands ringed, boots spotless, everyone who sees him understands the truth. This is not a man. This is a symbol, and symbols are always well dressed. One man dresses in a single wool tunic patched beyond recognition. The other is wrapped in layers of tailored elegance. The peasant gets dressed while standing, shivering beside a smoky hearth. The king is dressed by others, warmed by the fire he never has to feed. But both, beneath it all, are still just men. One clothed in discomfort, the other in performance. One wrapped in survival, the other wrapped in image. Both bound by thread, though only one can afford to ignore the seams. You step outside and the cold hits like a slap. The door swings on tired hinges and the air is sharp enough to sting the inside of your nose. You squint into the early light. The sun isn't up yet. Not really. Just a pale smear on the horizon. Your breath clouds in front of you like smoke. You don't need a clock to know the time. Your bones do that for you. The yard is a mess of frozen ruts and old straw. Chickens peck lazily near the woodpile. One of them is limping. You make a mental note to check its leg later. You won't. There's no time. Your day begins not with a plan, but a list of obligations stacked like firewood, uneven, unstable, always about to topple. First, you check the animals. The pig is rooting through what remains of the compost pile. Its eyes follow you warily, like it knows it's next on the menu if winter doesn't ease up. It's probably right. You refill its trough with scraps, turnip skins, old leaves, and a few spoonfuls of yesterday's porridge crusted onto the side of the pot. The pig eats with more energy than you'll have all day. The firewood pile is low again. You grab the axe from its spot against the wall, the handle smooth from use, the blade nicked and dulled. You trudge toward the tree line, feet sinking slightly into frozen mud. You've been harvesting from the same grove all winter. Each day you go a little farther in. Each swing of the axe feels heavier than the last. You gather what you can carry. Broken branches, bark, even damp twigs. Everything burns if you're desperate enough. You haul it back in bundles on your back. No sled, no cart, no mule, just you. You stack it haphazardly near the door. It won't last a week. Then water. Always water. You walk to the stream with a bucket in each hand. The water is clearer than it should be, a bad sign. That means fewer fish, fewer frogs. You draw it up in silence. You slip once on the icy stones and your knee slams into the mud. You swear under your breath. The water sloshes. One bucket spills. You don't refill it. You just go home. Back at the hut, your wife is spinning wool by the hearth. The children are up now, huddled near the fire, watching her fingers work the spindle with slow, practiced movements. The baby cries. She doesn't stop spinning. You change into your working tunic, the one with fewer holes near the knees, and wrap a cloth around your head. There's work waiting in the Lord's field. There's always work and always for someone else's benefit. You walk the mile to the manorial land, shoulders hunched, hands in sleeves. Others walk beside you. Men you know, men you don't talk to. Conversation is a luxury for men with energy. You save your breath for labor. Today's duty is muck spreading. The stench is overwhelming. You breathe through your mouth and try not to gag. You shovel slowly, methodically, spreading dung across frozen soil in the name of future fertility. You don't ask how much you'll be paid. You won't be. This is part of your feudal obligation. Corvée labor. You owe the Lord so many days a year, and today is one of them. You'll get a nod, maybe some leftover grain if he's feeling generous. You won't complain. You've seen what happens to men who do. In the medieval manorial system, peasants were expected to work their lord's lands in addition to tending their own. The balance was impossible. Your own plot withers while you sow his wealth, but to protest is to starve. By midday, your hands are raw, your legs tremble. You've relieved yourself behind a tree and wiped with leaves. Your stomach groans. Lunch is whatever you brought. A crust of bread, a clove of garlic, a slice of dried turnip wrapped in cloth. You chew slowly, seated on a rock, watching the Lord's Reeve ride by on horseback. His boots shine. Your knees are stained with filth. You finish eating. There is more work. There is always more. The king's duties begin in the great hall long after the servants have finished setting it in order. Tall windows spill colored light across polished floors, and the air is fragrant with herbs scattered to mask the smell of too many bodies in too little space. A scribe stands ready with a scroll. The steward approaches, bowing low. The first item on the agenda is a petition from a noble family requesting permission to build a new mill. The king listens, then gestures. Let the advisors argue. He'll decide once they've worn themselves out. He settles into the high-backed chair, not quite a throne, but elevated nonetheless, and sips wine from a goblet carved with a royal crest. His robe is thick velvet, his fingers heavy with rings. A clerk begins reading aloud the list of grievances from the local burghers. The taxes are too high. The roads are impossible. Bandits stalk the woods again. The king nods occasionally. Mostly he thinks about lunch. A messenger arrives from the northern border. There's trouble, as always. The baron is late with his levies. The peasants there have been refusing to work. He asks if soldiers should be dispatched. The king raises an eyebrow. Only if the harvest is in, he murmurs. The medieval king was not always a tyrant. His days were often consumed with small, grinding details, managing trade routes, hearing disputes, confirming marriages, ensuring vassals remained loyal. His power was vast, but not absolute. Even a king needed to maneuver through politics, through custom, through the church. A priest approaches with a sealed letter from the bishop. More concerns about heresy in the southern shires. A wandering preacher has been stirring up unrest. The king sighs. He'll let the Inquisition deal with that. The court jester interrupts with a joke. No one laughs until the king smirks. Then the room erupts with polite chuckles. He listens to a minstrel perform a new ballad, half paying attention while his steward quietly counts out expenses from the last feast. The numbers are high. No one questions it. Then come the petitions from the commoners. A farmer with a broken fence and a neighbor with aggressive geese. A baker arguing with a brewer about grain prices. The king listens for a moment, then waves them away. Let the Reeves sort it. A hunting party is scheduled for the afternoon. He looks forward to that. A break from the talking, but for now he returns to his chamber to review letters. His own seal, his own wax, his own ink made from oak galls and iron salts. He doesn't write them, of course. He dictates. The scribe's job is to translate the king's words into something dignified. One letter to a cousin in France, another to the Pope, a third to a mistress in a border town. By late morning, he's spoken to 30 men, heard 20 grievances, signed 15 scrolls, and decided very little. But his presence is enough. He is king, and kings above all must be seen. One man begins his day by shoveling manure, the other by shuffling papers. One earns nothing and owes everything. The other owns everything and earns nothing. Yet both play their roles in a kingdom that demands performance. The peasant labors under the weight of his body. The king labors under the weight of his title. One cannot rest, the other cannot hide. The peasant's duties draw blood, the king's draw ink. You wake up already unclean. There's no moment of freshness, no scent of soap, no warm water on the face. Dirt lives with you, not just under your nails or on your skin, but in your mattress, in your clothes, in your food, and sometimes in your blood. You don't notice it anymore, or rather you notice it constantly, and there's just nothing to do about it. There's a bucket in the corner of your hut. It's filled with gray water, the same used yesterday to rinse a bowl or wash your child's feet. You splash your hands into it, then rub your face. It's shockingly cold. You blink. Your skin tightens. You feel more awake but not cleaner. Soap is rare. When it exists, it's made from lye and animal fat, coarse and stinging, and kept for special occasions. Your wife used the last of it weeks ago to wash linens before the saint's feast. She still has the blisters. You wipe your hands on your tunic, which is already soiled at the waist from firewood, ash, and pig feet. It doesn't matter. You smell like sweat and smoke and old wool. So does everyone else. Medieval peasants didn't bathe often, not because they didn't want to, but because there was little opportunity, no plumbing, and no privacy. Water had to be carried bucket by bucket from streams or wells. Heating it meant burning precious firewood. The result, a full bath happened maybe a few times a year, more often in summer, less in winter. You couldn't waste warmth. The church preached cleanliness of the soul, not the body. Some monks bathed, but for the average laborer, a wash meant a quick splash of cold water on the face and hands. You've heard rumors of Roman baths, ancient places of steam and marble, but they sound more like fairy tales than history. You pick at the dirt in your fingernails. It's a pointless ritual. You'll be knee-deep in soil within the hour anyway. Your feet are cracked, your knuckles chapped. You have a rash on your leg that hasn't gone away. You think it might be ringworm or just irritation from your hose rubbing the same spot every day. Your wife combs the children's hair with her fingers. You see a louse? She crushes it with a thumbnail and keeps going. The toilet is a pit behind the hut, half covered with old wood planks. In winter, it's frozen and dangerous. You squat beside it instead. Everyone does. No one speaks of it. Public latrines exist in larger towns, but they overflow. Chamber pots are dumped into the street. You've seen someone throw waste from a window and yell, "Gardez l'eau!" A crude French warning to clear the path. You didn't move fast enough. Tooth care. You chew on a mint sprig if you can find one. Some folks use cloth to scrub with ashes. Most just lose their teeth before 40. You run your tongue along your molars and feel one wiggle. You spit and there's blood again. The village healer, not a doctor, just an old woman with herbs, told you to drink nettle tea. It didn't help. She also said to sleep with a toad under your pillow. You didn't try that one. Disease is constant. Boils, fevers, coughs that never quite go away. One of the neighbor's sons died last week. Fever and vomiting. They said it might have been bad meat or water or God's will. You check the baby's forehead. Still warm, not burning, but not right. Your wife hasn't said anything, but you see the fear in her eyes. You know people who carry dried herbs in pouches around their necks to keep away miasma's bad air. The priest says illness is a punishment. The healer says it's the weather. You say nothing. What's the point? Your neighbor claims he went 6 years without getting sick. Then his foot turned black. He died 3 days later. You dunk your head in the water trough to rinse your hair. It doesn't help. You smell like a man who works for a living. You always will. And still you go on because there's no alternative. The king wakes not to filth but to fragrance. His chambers are swept twice daily by servants using bundles of herbs, thyme, rosemary, lavender, scattered across the stone floors. They don't just freshen the air, they're believed to ward off illness. Clean smells, they say, make for a clean body. He sits beside a basin of warm water. A servant dips a cloth, wrings it carefully, and wipes the king's face and neck. Another dabs at his hands. The water is infused with rose petals, orange blossoms, sometimes vinegar. It smells like luxury. Unlike peasants, the king does not carry his own water, nor does he walk to the bathhouse. The bath comes to him in the form of a large wooden tub lined with linen sheets, filled with heated water poured from brass pitchers. He bathes when he wishes, sometimes once a week, sometimes daily. It's his choice. Soap is not just available, it's imported. Bars come from Castile, made with olive oil and lye, scented with citrus or pine. It lathers softly, it does not sting. The king's skin is pampered with oils afterward to prevent dryness. Almond oil if it's in stock, goose fat if not. He is rubbed with cloths made of fine linen. His hair is brushed with a boar bristle brush, his nails trimmed with care, checked for signs of illness. Cleanliness for royalty is not merely comfort. It's an extension of health, of status, of godliness. His physicians, university-trained perhaps in Paris or Salerno, believe the body has 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. Balance is key. They advise the king to avoid dampness, excess wind, spoiled food. He is bled periodically to restore equilibrium. He follows a regimen known as Regimen Sanitatis, rules for healthy living. Moderate food, rest, gentle movement, fresh air, no overexertion. The body, they say, must be tended like a garden. His teeth are cleaned with a cloth dipped in wine or vinegar, sometimes ashes or crushed herbs. He rinses with sage-infused water. Bad breath, the doctor says, can signal internal decay. He listens even if he finds it tedious. Illness is still a threat, of course. Even kings get fevers. Even kings die of the plague. But when he falls ill, he is surrounded by care. Poultices, prayers, leeches, tinctures brewed in silver pots. When he coughs, 5 men listen. During outbreaks, the king retreats to the countryside, to the coast, anywhere but the city. He closes the gates, no visitors. The poor die in the streets. He reads about it in letters. He hears tales of entire towns falling ill, entire villages vanishing. He commissions a prayer, a mass, a candle to be lit, and he dines as usual. Cleanliness to him is visible, it is scented, it is symbolic. And above all, it is managed by others. The peasant scrapes the mud from his heels with a stick. The king scrapes the dirt from his nails with ivory. The peasant smells of animals, ash, and labor. The king smells of citrus and rose water. One body is raw from cold water and coarse wool. The other is cradled by steam and silk. But both, in the end, bleed. Both when cut scar. Both when struck by plague fall the same way. And death, whether in a straw bed or a gilded chamber, does not care for soap. Leisure for you is a strange word. It sounds like something for other people. Softer lives, softer hands. You don't have leisure. You have pauses, gaps in labor, where your body aches too much to move and your thoughts shuffle through boredom and pain. Still, even the lowest peasant finds a way to break the monotony. Because if all you ever do is work, eventually you forget why you bother to survive at all. The first and most common form of entertainment: talking. Not idle gossip, although that exists, but stories. Tales told by the firelight. When the work is done, when the children have quieted and the pot is empty. You don't own a book. You can't read, and neither can anyone else you know. But you've heard stories passed down from your grandfather about saints, demons, dragons, and long-dead kings. Some tales are morality fables. Others are barely held-together nonsense about animals who outwit the devil. All are told slowly, dramatically, with long pauses and widened eyes. They don't have to make sense. They just have to make you forget your hunger. The village also entertains itself with song, not in melodies you'd find in a cathedral, but sharp, rhythmic chants. Simple lyrics, easy to remember, often lewd, always local. You know a dozen that mention someone in your hamlet by name. You sing while you work sometimes, not because it's fun, but because it helps the time pass. Festivals, when they happen, are the height of joy. The church calendar provides structure. Feast days, saints' days, holy days. These are your sanctioned excuses to stop laboring, to drink, to dance, to gather in the square with others and pretend the year isn't dragging its weight across your back. During the Feast of St. Martin, the villagers roast what meat they can spare. You once saw a pig's head carried on a platter, its eyes replaced with onions. Children danced around it. Someone juggled turnips. You drank too much ale and vomited behind the church. It was the best night of your year. Games exist too. No boards, no tokens, just rocks, sticks, and imagination. You've played Catch the Goose, a game that mostly involves chasing a terrified bird across a field while people laugh. You've bet on who can lift the biggest log. You've watched grown men wrestle in the mud for nothing but pride and scratches. Sometimes a traveling performer passes through, a juggler, a puppet show, a man with a monkey who does tricks for coin. You watched one swallow fire once. You're still not sure how he survived. You didn't have a penny to give him, but you stood in the mud for an hour and watched in silence. And then, of course, there's ale. Weak, cloudy, sour, brewed in barrels that have never been cleaned, served in mugs that have never been washed. But it works. It dulls the edge. On a good night, you sit with neighbors nursing the drink and listening to someone attempt a dirty joke that's too long and poorly told. You laugh anyway, not at the joke, at the effort. Drunkenness isn't frowned upon exactly, is expected. Your Lord drinks too. The priest may warn against excess, but even he accepts a cup during feast days. You've danced in the dirt barefoot with someone else's wife. You've sung songs you don't remember. You've fallen asleep under a tree and woken up with leaves in your mouth. It isn't much. It's barely anything. But for a few hours, it's enough. For the king, entertainment is an institution, an extension of power, taste, and spectacle. It isn't simply about enjoyment. It's about control, presentation, dominance of boredom itself. Each day, the king has choices: music, sport, hunting, dining, or the theater of politics. Each a stage upon which he performs his identity as ruler. In the late morning, a minstrel plays in the solar, lute, harp, flute, trained hands plucking chords composed to soothe or flatter. The melodies are composed by professionals, copied by scribes, and performed by those who know their lives depend on the king's reaction. He listens idly. Sometimes he closes his eyes, not out of appreciation, but out of boredom. Then he waves a hand and says, "Enough." The room empties. Later, he walks in the gardens. These aren't wild hedgerows like they outside the peasant's hut. They are curated spaces, ornamental herbs, sculpted topiaries, fountains imported from Italy, everything arranged to remind him of order, his order. He plays chess with a visiting noble. The board is made of inlaid ivory and lapis. The pieces are hand-carved. The game is long, slow, half conversation, half test. He wins because he must. The noble doesn't mind. He was never trying to win anyway. In the afternoon, he hunts. The royal hunt is not a necessity. It's not about feeding the court. It's theater. He mounts his horse bred for stamina and speed, wearing a leather doublet, gloves stitched with his crest. Hawks ride on gloved fists, hounds run ahead, horns sound. The forest clears for him. The animals are driven toward him by beaters, peasants with sticks shouting and stomping through a brush. When the deer appears, he loses his arrow. If he hits, it is a great shot. If he misses, it was a great shot that narrowly missed. The record will reflect it either way. At the end of the hunt, there is a feast. The boar is roasted whole. Game birds are dressed in their own feathers. Wine flows freely. This is not survival. This is abundance, a display of divine favor. The medieval king's court often included jesters, acrobats, storytellers, and even magicians. These performers were well-trained, many traveling across kingdoms. A single misstep, a poorly told joke, an insult taken too far could mean exile or worse. But if they succeeded, they might die near nobility, gain patronage, or receive a gift of land. He watches a performance. A troupe enacts a play from a distant city, perhaps Paris or Prague. The themes are familiar: betrayal, honor, God. He applauds at the end, even if he barely followed the plot. The hall echoes with approval. No one asks if he enjoyed it. In the evening, he may read, not aloud, that is for clerks, but he listens to books being read to him, tales of ancient Rome, romances of knights and maidens, treatises on theology. He asks questions occasionally, not always expecting answers. Then music again, then a warm bath, then sleep. Entertainment is not rare for him. It is constant, and yet he is often bored. The peasant laughs because it might be the only joy he feels all week. The king laughs because it's expected. One dances in the dirt in bare feet, to the rhythm of a friend slapping a barrel. The other dances in a hall gilded and perfumed to strings and harps. One sings to forget the hunger. The other listens to singers to fill the silence. The peasant waits all year for a single feast day. The king feasts every day and longs for something new. Yet both in their own way seek the same thing: to forget for a moment what they are. You wake hungry again. You went to bed with hunger sitting in your gut like a stone, and it's still there, just dulled by sleep. The idea of being full feels like a memory from another life. Maybe you were full once, a festival day, a neighbor's wedding. But most mornings, like this one, Your stomach starts out quiet and gets louder by the hour. You stir the pot hanging over the hearth. It's yesterday's pottage, still warm from the coals, thick like glue and brown like mud, bits of barley, a turnip chunk, a wilted leaf. You ladle a scoop into your bowl. There's not much left, so you give the bigger share to your eldest child. He doesn't thank you. He just eats like a dog that doesn't want to be seen. Pottage is what you eat. Morning, evening, sometimes cold in the middle of the day, if there's enough to spare. There's no recipe. It's whatever you have, boiled for hours until it can't be picked apart. Barley and oats are common. Sometimes beans, peas, leeks. If you're lucky, a scrap of fatback or a bone for flavor, usually not. Bread is next, if there's any. Yours is black and hard, made from rye and barley. Grains that grow better in poor soil, the kind you farm. The flour is mixed with water and salt if you have it, then baked into rounds or flat cakes in the communal oven if you remembered your place in line. There's grit in the bread. Stone ground flour always leaves a bit behind, and it wears your teeth down year by year. Your molars feel dull now. One is starting to crack. You chew anyway. Slowly, carefully, you drink ale. Everyone does, not the strong stuff. What you have is weak and cloudy, more like fermented grain tea than anything intoxicating. But it's safe, safer than the river. The well went bad last month, and you still remember the sick child who didn't make it. Boiling water takes firewood, and firewood takes hours. Al it is. Meat is rare. Maybe once a month you buy a scrap from the tanner, a cut too fatty to cure or too bruised to store. You boil it with roots and pretend it's a feast. Sometimes your neighbor traps a rabbit. You pretend not to notice. Hunting's forbidden unless you're a noble. The punishment for poaching a deer is death. For a rabbit, a beating. For a swan, you don't want to know. Your pigs are gone. Sold off after the last frost destroyed the root cellar. Chickens are easier to keep, but they don't lay in winter. You used to trade eggs for cheese. Now you just eat the eggs when there are any. Cheese is a summer luxury. Milk turns too quickly this time of year. On holy days, there's more to eat. Saints' feasts, harvest festivals, weddings. These are the times you remember with your eyes closed. Bread stuffed with onions, roasted goose, baked apples dripping with honey. It doesn't last, but it burns into memory. You've told your children stories of the last Makemas feast as if it were legend. Some peasants barter with their produce. You trade leeks for butter, cabbages for fish. The fish is salted, rough on the tongue, but keeps well. You once found a coin at the roadside and bought a fig at market. 1 figure. You sliced it in 4 and let your children each have a piece. They still talk about it. Your food doesn't travel. Nothing comes from farther than a day's walk. You don't know what olives are. You've never seen a lemon. Spices are a rumor. Pepper for princes. You flavor with herbs you grow yourself. Thyme, mustard leaf, horseradish root. You salt when you can. More often, you don't. Your wife cooks. She stirs, strains, kneads, and lifts pots that steam her face red. Her hands are always red and cracked. Your eldest daughter helps scraping pots and tending the fire. Meals are more work than reward. You eat in silence or with quiet murmurs. No time for talk. You eat to finish. And when it's done, you thank God whether you mean it or not. Then you go back to work. The king eats whenever he chooses, or rather whenever the schedule of the court allows him to be fed with ceremony. Meals are more than nourishment here. They are theater. Statements, a feast not just for his guests, but for the idea of monarchy itself. His food is prepared in vast kitchens beneath the castle. Whole departments exist to coordinate the supply of game, fish, vegetables, spices, bread, and wine. There are master cooks, assistants, pastry makers, poulters, fishmongers, sauce chefs, spit turners, butterers, cupbearers, and food tasters. Each has a rank. Some have apprentices. Many serve for life. Bread arrives first, white and soft, made of wheat grown on royal estates and sifted through fine cloth. This is mannet bread made only for the rich. It's served warm, but sliced thin by a specialist. He carries the knife like a knight might carry a sword. Next come meats. Spit-roasted balls, larded hares, herbed venison, wild birds cooked in wine and cloves. There are pies with layered fillings, pigeon, pear, dates, and veal, each crust sealed and stamped with the royal crest. Everything smells of spice: nutmeg, ginger, cinnamon, saffron. Spice is more expensive than gold. The king does not eat from wooden bowls. His dishes are pewter, silver, or gilded ceramic. His goblets are etched glass or ornate metal, often studded with stones. He drinks wine from Aquitaine, Cyprus, Burgundy, imported by merchants who bribe their way into court favor. There is fish, always fish, even on meat days. Salted sturgeon, eels in almond milk, baked trout garnished with violets. On Fridays and fast days when meat is forbidden by church law, the cooks become even more inventive. Whale meat is considered fish by decree. So is beaver tail. So are frogs. A theologian once argued that barnacle geese born of driftwood were also fish. Feasts are long, 3, sometimes 4 hours. Each course ends with an entremet, a kind of edible entertainment. A model castle made of pastry, a roasted peacock redressed in its feathers set ablaze with brandy, a pie that when opened releases live birds into the hall. The king eats little of each dish, a few bites, a taste. He's not eating for hunger, he's eating for demonstration. His physicians monitor his consumption carefully. He is advised according to the theory of the 4 humors, balance between hot, cold, wet, and dry. Roast beef is hot and dry. Fresh apples are cold and moist. Food must be chosen with care, lest it unbalance the king's body, or worse, his mind. Sometimes he is bled before a meal. Sometimes he fasts. Sometimes he indulges, but always the meal is recorded, chronicled, observed. If guests are present, and they often are, they watch the king eat first. They do not begin until he does. They are served less lavish versions of his dishes. They watch his face for signs. Did he like the quail? Was the sauce too sharp? Should they compliment the chef? After the meal, his hands are washed in rose water by attendants. A perfumed cloth is offered, a minstrel plays, a servant recites a list of expenses incurred, and then with a nod, he stands. The meal is over, the performance is complete. The peasant eats scraps and roots and salt. The king eats peacocks and pears in wine. The peasant prays for enough. The king prays it's not overdone. The peasant eats what he can find. The king chooses what others search for. But both, under wool or velvet, in drafty huts or gilded halls, must eat. Both rely on others, one on the land, the other on men. Neither can live without the hands that grow, gather, kill, and cook. The difference is who gets to rest afterwards. You wake with the name of a saint on your lips. You're not sure which one. There are too many. Saint Cathbot, Saint Isidore, the one your wife prays to for healthy births, or the one your neighbor swears healed his cow's leg. They blur together. Their images are painted badly on wood or carved in the stone at the chapel. Flat eyes and bent fingers holding books, staffs, or babies. They all look tired. You feel the same. Religion is not something you think about. It's something you live inside. Like the weather, like the mud, you cross yourself before you eat. You mumble prayers before bed. You know the Lord's Prayer, though half the words don't mean anything to you. You know the creed. You know that Sunday is for church, and that missing it gets you noticed. You know the priest smells like wine and speaks in Latin. Latin, a language you do not understand. The priest reads from his book with a voice like a chant, rising and falling like the wind in the eaves. You nod, you kneel, you stand, you sit, you say amen. It's all by rhythm, like a dance you never learned but have done all your life. The church is cold always. Stone walls, no fire, just candles, a rough altar, and the echo of old prayers. You sit on a bench and think about your chores. You don't mean to, you just do. The church tells you what to eat and when to fast. It tells you when to mourn and when to celebrate. There are dozens of feast days, but most of them mean kneeling more, not eating more. On Fridays, you don't eat meat. During Lent, you eat less of everything. Advent is for waiting. Easter is for singing. Christmas is for huddling close to the fire. The priest is not poor. He has a servant, a fat goose, and shoes without holes. He doesn't till the soil, but he talks about sin with the confidence of someone who's never had to lie for a crust of bread. Still you listen. He buries your dead. He blesses your fields. He might even know your name. When things go wrong, when a child is born sick, or a cow refuses to milk, or the weather turns against you, you look for meaning, for punishment, for sin, for someone to blame. You tie herbs above the door, light a candle, leave a coin at the chapel. You mutter to St. Bridget, or St. Bly, or St. Jude. You aren't sure which one helps with fever. You try them all. You've heard of people who stopped going to Mass. They vanished, or starved, or had their thatch catch fire in the night. You don't test those stories. Superstition isn't separate from faith. It's just the part the priest doesn't talk about. Your wife hangs charms over the cradle. Your neighbor buries nails at the corner of his field. You carry a bone in your pouch just in case. The seasons change with the saints. Michaelmas brings the harvest. Candlemas starts the 4. Midsummer's Eve is a night for fire and fear. When spirits walk and old magic stirs, you've jumped over the fire with bare feet. You've thrown salt into the ashes. You've whispered things you wouldn't dare say aloud. There's a woman outside the village, an herbalist, maybe more. Some say she's a witch. Others say she's just clever. You went to her once when your youngest was sick. She gave you a sack of dried nettles and told you to burn it while singing. You did. The fever broke the next day. Coincidence? Got her. You'll never know. That's the point. You believe because belief is what keeps you sane, because it gives shape to fear. Because if you don't believe, what's left? Just cold, just hunger, just death. So you believe. Even when you doubt, you believe. The king prays too, but his prayers are written by others. In the chapel attached to the royal palace, he kneels on cushions surrounded by marble and stained glass. He holds a prayer book, a psalter illuminated in gold and crimson with saints drawn in miniature. The words are in Latin, but he's been taught them since childhood. He knows when to bow, when to pause, when to look solemn. His faith is not just personal, it is political. Monarchs in medieval Europe ruled by divine right, their authority sanctioned by God, their power confirmed by coronation and anointing. To doubt the king was to doubt heaven itself. The king has confessors, bishops, and chaplains. He speaks with archbishops about church lands, tithes, theological debates. He funds monasteries and orders mass for the souls of his ancestors. He appoints clerics. He consults with Rome. He does not question doctrine. He shapes it. He observes holy days with ceremony, Easter, Christmas, Corpus Christi. The palace fills with clergy, incense, chant. Meals are altered, penances assigned, gifts offered to shrines. The performance is elaborate and necessary. But the king's religion is not always about belief. It's about structure, about order. The church records births, marriages, deaths. It legitimizes rule. It grants approval. It threatens excommunication. For the king, the church is an institution, a partner and a rival, a mirror of his own power. Still, he believes in his own way. He believes because the system would collapse if he didn't. He believes in divine order, in moral duty, in eternal reward. And yet he too fears what lives outside the liturgy. He fears omens, eclipses, comets, strange births. He fears prophecy, dreams, the muttering of madmen. He wears relics under his cloak, a saint's tooth, a splinter from the true cross. His armor has a cross etched inside the breastplate. He believes it protects him. He consults astrologers. He reads horoscopes. His advisors tell him which days to travel and which to avoid. Before battle, he fasts. He hears mass. He takes communion. He believes it will turn the tide. When plague strikes, he orders public prayers. He funds processions. He closes the city gates. He retreats to the countryside. He commissions masses for the dead. Thousands of names read aloud night after night. He has seen what faith looks like in desperation. He has seen villagers fog themselves in the street begging God to spare them. He has seen men weep in front of statues. He has seen the bones of saints carried through mud. He believes, but he does not trust. He rules the body of the realm. The church claims the soul. And both know that if one crumbles, the other soon follows. The peasant clutches a wooden cross and whispers a desperate prayer. The king kisses a jeweled crucifix and signs a royal decree. One lights a candle for luck. The other funds a cathedral. One is told that suffering brings salvation. The other is told that power confirms holiness. Yet both fear the same silence after death. Both kneel in different places on different floors wearing different clothes, but both pray to the same God, and both hope they are being heard. You wake before the light, not from a rooster's crow. He's late as usual, but from the sound of your joints cracking as you roll upright on a straw mattress that smells of mildew and years of sweat. You rub your eyes. Try to remember if today is your turn to haul water or your son's and reach for the same coarse tunic you wore yesterday and the day before. You're not free. That's not something you say out loud. It's not a thought you entertain often, but it lingers in your ribs, in your hands, in the rhythm of your life. You are a serf bound to the land, not a slave, not in name, but near enough that the difference hardly matters. Your Lord owns the ground beneath your feet. You simply borrow its surface one furrow at a time. Today's labor is predictable. Muck the stalls, collect firewood, repair a fence flattened in the storm. Tomorrow it might be threshing grain in the manor's barn, or filling a barrel of ale to the Reeves's house, or helping with the sheep. Work does not rotate with fairness. Need never sleeps. Each season comes with its own torment. Spring is planting, endless hours hunched over rows of soil, pushing seeds into earth, still clinging to winter's chill. Summer means harvest, and your fingers blister as you reap barley and hay until your tunic clings to you with sweat. Autumn is the rush to preserve, salting meat, storing apples, bottling what little beer you've brewed before it spoils. And winter is endurance. Cold seeps in through the thatch and into your bones. You wake stiff and hungry, go to sleep hungrier still. Most days you eat bread. Not the white loaves of the rich, but dark, dense barley bread flecked with grit from the millstone. Pottage if you're lucky, a stew of whatever you've managed to find or grow, leeks, turnips, beans, a strip of bacon if you're blessed, instead of water because water might kill you. You have no tools of your own, just what's passed down or shared. A wooden plow with a cracked handle, a hoe tied with twine, a cart with one good wheel. If something breaks, you fix it. Or you don't and make do anyway. Under feudal law, you owe your overlord between 2 and 5 days of labor each week, depending on your agreement. This is called corvée labor, and it's not optional. You work his land before your own. You mend his fences, repair his roads, harvest his grain. Only afterward, if time and daylight allow, do you tend to your own meager strip of soil. If you protest, you risk punishment. If you falter, you risk starvation. And then there are the taxes. You pay a tithe to the church, 1/10 of everything you grow. If your harvest is bad, the tithe remains the same. The priest doesn't farm, but he eats well. You also owe bailiffs or fees for using the Lord's mill, his oven, his press. Nothing is free. Even boiling water might require permission. Your wife labors just as hard. She spins, bakes, cleans, tends animals, nurses children, and still finds time to mend your socks. There's no rest for her either, nor for your children. The moment they can lift a bucket or shoe a goose, they work. No one asks you what you want to be when you grow up. You already are what you will be. A worker of land, a servant of someone else's estate, a man defined by how long his back can hold out. But sometimes there's a quiet joy. You finish digging a new furrow and step back to admire its line. You patch the roof with thatch that stays dry during the next rain. You build a chicken coop from scrap wood and watch your children gather eggs with giddy smiles. It's not ambition, it's not pride, but it's yours. You might think a king's life is idle, that he lies in silk, is fed by servants, drifts from banquet to banquet. That's true some of the time, but ruling is work. Different work, yes, but work all the same. He wakes surrounded by functionaries, a chamberlain, a squire, a confessor, a groom of the stool. Every movement is observed, every word carries weight. He is expected to be the embodiment of divine order. The cornerstone of a realm stitched together by loyalty and law. His day begins with counsel. The royal household is a bureaucracy. Treasurers count coin, stewards manage land, scribes track correspondence. The king listens as they list problems, border disputes, unpaid taxes, bad harvests, rebellious barons. He must decide what to do. His decision becomes law. He spends hours holding courts, some of it ceremonial, knights seeking titles, nobles pledging fealty, some of it judicial cases of land theft, marriage disputes, accusations of treason. His presence alone influences the outcome. One raised eyebrow can sway a sentence. Kings are also diplomats. He arranges marriages like chess moves. One daughter to seal peace with Aragon, a nephew sent to marry a distant duchess. Alliances made not with treaties, but with bloodlines. He governs warfare, too. In times of peace, he trains, reviews armories, sends funds to fortify castles, approves levy rosters. In times of war, he commands directly or through trusted generals. Many medieval kings ride to battle themselves. Some die there. His signature controls currency. A decree to mint more silver coins or to debase the currency slightly ripples across trade networks. He must think like a banker, a warlord, and a priest, all while keeping the nobles happy and the peasants quiet. Even feasts are work. He sits at the center, radiant with wealth, a living symbol of stability. His food is inspected, his wine poured by protocol. Every bite is a message. To eat too much is gluttony, too little ingratitude. He meets with bishops, abbots, and papal legates. The church is both ally and rival. The king may fund monasteries and cathedrals, but he's also wary of Rome's influence. A single excommunication can undermine his throne. Sometimes in a quiet hour, the king reads or listens to a clerk read aloud books of law, chronicles religious texts. He must be informed. Ignorance is weakness. He must also project health. A weak king invites rebellion. So he rides, he hunts, he leads processions. He is seen. Visibility is a kind of labor, exhausting, unending. Even his sleep is guarded. His dreams not fully his own. He doesn't dig ditches, but he holds a realm together, and that's no small task. The peasants' hands are calloused from earth. The kings are calloused from decisions. One sweats in the fields, the other sweats in the throne room. One's misstep means hunger, the other's misstep means rebellion. Both are watched, one by the steward, the other by his subjects. Both are punished, one by weather, the other by politics. The peasant works to endure, the king works to be remembered, but neither truly rests, and neither can exist without the other. You feel it before anyone else does. The way your breath shortens, the way your hands shake a little when you lift the pail. You try not to let the others see. There's too much to do. The firewood's low, the roof leaks again. There's turnip rot in the cellar. You sit more often. Tell your children to fetch this or that. You smile when they obey, though inside you hate needing help. You were strong once. You worked from sunrise to nightfall. You built things with your hands. You never thought about how many winters were left until now. The pain gets worse. There is no doctor. There's no diagnosis. You do not know if it's your lungs or your liver or just your body deciding it's had enough. The midwife comes and gives you a tonic made of bitter root. The healer suggests nettle broth. The priest visits with a candle and a book. He asks if you are ready to confess. You are, not because you think you've sinned more than anyone else, but because that's what you do. You confess. You receive the last rites. You try to die with dignity, even if the straw beneath you is wet and your wife is weeping into her sleeves. In medieval villages, death is part of life. The average life expectancy hovers around 35, but it isn't because people drop dead in their 30s. It's because children die often and women die in childbirth. And accidents and illness don't wait. If you survive past childhood, you might live to 40, maybe even 50, but it's rare to see 60. Your family gathers. They're quiet. They don't ask questions. They know. You try to say something meaningful, a lesson, a joke, a goodbye. You try to remember your father's face. You try not to think of your dead son. You think about the fence you never fixed and the new tools you can't afford and the wheat you planted that someone else will harvest. There is no funeral procession. There's no tombstone. You're buried behind the church, maybe with a wooden cross if there's time to carve one. The priest says words in Latin. You don't understand them. You hope God does. And what's left of you? A patched roof, a good rake, a son who knows how to tie a proper bundle of kindling. A daughter who still sings while she milks the goat. Maybe someone will name their baby after you. Maybe they'll say he was kind, he worked hard, he never wasted bread. That is enough, because no one remembers most peasants, not in books, not in songs, but the world they built one rock and one bale of hay at a time. That stays standing. That's legacy. He feels it too, but he's not allowed to show it. A king dying is a dangerous thing. It unsettles the court, it invites ambition, so the royal physicians say he is only tired. The courtiers whisper that he is resting. His enemies wonder how long he has left. His body is failing, but protocol does not. In medieval Europe, royal death is a ritualized event. The king does not simply fade, he begins to transition. His bedchamber becomes a chamber of state. Attendants hover, clerics arrive. The royal confessor is summoned. The windows are shuttered. The best relics are brought in. He is anointed again just as he was at coronation, but this time with the oil of the dying. He confesses sins. He asks for forgiveness. He clutches a crucifix of gold and mutters prayers learned in boyhood. A scribe stands nearby to write down his last words, or at least something poetic enough to be remembered. The king's death must not be ordinary. If he ruled wisely, he is mourned. If he ruled poorly, he is endured until the last breath. But in either case, he is treated like a vessel of divinity until the end. His family gathers, sons, if he has them, a wife, maybe two, a bishop reads scripture. Trumpets may sound in the courtyard. The realm holds its breath, and when he dies, really dies, the news is announced with fanfare. A black cloth is hung from the castle walls. Church bells toll across the countryside. Messengers ride to the cities. Nobles are summoned to court. The royal seal is broken. Then comes the body. His corpse is washed and dressed, sometimes embalmed, sometimes not. Some kings have their organs removed. Some have their hearts buried separately. Some have their bones boiled to be transported without rot. He is placed in a coffin of wood or stone or even lead. A likeness may be carved in wax, a death mask taken. The funeral is pageantry. Dozens of priests, hundreds of candles, choirs singing psalms, nobles in black, a procession of mourners, some paid to weep, some there to be seen. The coffin is carried on a cart draped in velvet. Horses wear black. The heralds cry out his name, title by title, as he is lowered into the tomb. He is interred in a royal crypt. Westminster Sandringham spire surrounded by ancestors sealed in stone. His tomb is engraved with Latin verse, his image carved in marble. His sword may lie beside him. A crown may be placed at his feet. Sometimes he's buried with coins, relics, even jewels. His will is read, his heirs named, succession confirmed. But the kingdom does not rest. Wars break out over inheritance. Bastards rise to claim legitimacy. Queens remarry, parliaments quarrel. One king dies. Another takes his place always. And what remains of him? A lord that bears his name. A cathedral funded by his tithe. A portrait in a dusty hall. Maybe a chapter in a chronicle penned by a monk who never met him. But more often his memory fades, overwritten by the next war, the next tax, the next king. The peasant lies beneath earth and stone. The king lies beneath gold and marble. One is buried by neighbors, the other by nobles. One rests beside a ditch, the other in a crypt, but they are equally still. Time forgets them at the same speed. The world turns without them. Grass grows over the grave, language shifts, stories blur. In the end, legacy isn't a statue or a monument, it's the echo of your labor. The bread you baked that fed a child. The wall you built that stood another winter. The law you passed that outlasted your bones. The song someone still hums without remembering where they learned it. All things fade, but some things endure in work, in memory, in silence, and when both the king and the peasant have crumbled to dust. The only difference is how long it takes the wind to blow their names away. At the turn of the 20th century, a quiet exodus began. From Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana, Black families packed what little they had and moved. Some boarded northbound trains. Others rode in the backs of wagons with children asleep on bundles of clothes. They were escaping Jim Crow laws, lynchings, debt slavery, and fear. They were chasing something distant and fragile, freedom. Between 1910 and 1930, over 1.2 million Black Americans left the rural South. Historians would call it the Great Migration, but for those who lived it, it was simply a chance to breathe. Cities like Chicago, Detroit, and Philadelphia welcomed these new arrivals. But it was Harlem in Upper Manhattan that would become the brightest flame of all. Originally developed for white middle-class families, Harlem's housing boom collapsed in the early 1900s. Landlords, desperate to fill apartments, turned to the Black community. What followed was a transformation. Harlem became more than a neighborhood. It became a sanctuary. Within just a few blocks, you could find doctors, tailors, shoemakers, artists, and jazz musicians. You could hear sermons and saxophones, see poetry and protest, all in the same breath. It was not an easy life. Racism did not disappear in New York. Jobs were scarce, pay was low, but something else filled the streets. Hope. For the first time, Black people were living not in survival, but in expression. They were among their own, in a place that felt like something they had never known before. Home. Harlem became a laboratory of Black life, a place where culture wasn't just preserved, it was remixed. Traditions brought from the South mingled with Caribbean rhythms, African spiritual roots, and European modernism. Voices once silenced began to sing. Ideas once ignored began to spark. And before long, Harlem wasn't just a place to live, it was a place to be seen. By the early 1920s, you could feel it. Something was blooming, not a revolution in politics, but in art, in music, in language, in pride, a renaissance, not just of talent, but of identity, not just of performance, but of power. It had taken centuries of struggle to reach this moment. But in Harlem, at last, Black America began to tell its own story out loud. In Harlem, sound became the city's pulse. And nothing moved through its veins more powerfully than jazz. It didn't come from ivory towers or written scores. It came from front porches in New Orleans, from battered trumpets and syncopated hearts. It traveled north with the Great Migration, carried in memory and muscle where it met Harlem's hunger for expression and exploded. By the early 1920s, jazz wasn't just music. It was freedom set to rhythm. It bent rules. It played with time. It turned pain into melody and silence into motion. In Harlem, it echoed from open windows and spilled from basement clubs into the midnight air. On any given night, you might hear the gravel-rich voice of Bessie Smith rising from a record player in a parlor. You might pass a corner where a boy with a cornet tried to imitate Louis Armstrong. And if you were lucky enough or wealthy enough, you might step into a velvet-lined booth at the Cotton Club and hear Duke Ellington's orchestra thunder to life. Ellington's arrangements were a universe of sound. Horns that spoke like people, drums that made the floor shake, pianos that floated and pounced. His music didn't follow, it led. It made people move in ways they'd never moved before. For the first time in American history, Black musicians weren't just playing music, they were defining it. Outside the spotlight, the Harlem streets pulsed with rhythm, too. People danced in the Savoy Ballroom, a place where Black and white New Yorkers danced side by side, a radical act in its own right. Swing, stride, blues, it all blurred into one heartbeat. But jazz wasn't just noise, it was language. A trumpet solo could shout or weep, a saxophone could seduce or mourn. It captured what words often couldn't, the complexity of Black life, the joy and the ache, the rage and the pride. Even as racism and poverty pressed in, the music lifted people out. It said, "We are still here. We are still beautiful. We are still loud." And Harlem listened, not with ears only, but with its soul. While jazz poured from clubs and street corners, another revolution was happening in silence, on the page. In Harlem, words began to gather power. Young writers, poets, and thinkers took to their pens with the same energy musicians took to their instruments. But they weren't writing for applause, they were writing for truth, for memory, for justice, for voice. Langston Hughes arrived in Harlem like a rising tide. He was just a teenager when he wrote The Negro Speaks of Rivers, a poem that stretched across time, tracing Black identity from the Nile to the Mississippi. His poetry was simple, musical, and unafraid. He wrote of everyday people, janitors, dancers, tired mothers, dreamers, and gave their voices shape. Claude McKay's words were sharper, defiant, burning with a righteous fire. In poems like If We Must Die, he spoke directly to injustice with clenched fists and open eyes. For him, the pen was not just a tool, it was a blade. And then there was Zora Neale Hurston, a daughter of Eatonville, Florida, the first all-black town incorporated in the United States. Zora studied anthropology and captured the spoken word like no one else. She wrote the way people talked. Her stories were alive with dialect, rhythm, myth, and heat. Where others sought polish, she sought truth. Her voice was raw, real, and utterly new. Harlem's parlors became literary salons. Writers gathered late into the night, reading drafts aloud, arguing over politics and poetry. Black-owned magazines like The Crisis and Opportunity published bold new voices, voices that had once been ignored or erased. Together, they were forming something radical, a literature of Black identity, unfiltered by white approval, unapologetic in tone. They weren't trying to fit in, they were trying to speak. And in every stanza, story, and essay, they answered a quiet question. What does it mean to be Black in America? Sometimes the answer came as a love letter, sometimes as a shout, sometimes as a lullaby filled with longing. But always the pen pressed forward. Because in Harlem during this Renaissance, to write was to resist, and to resist was to live with pride. The Renaissance wasn't only heard or read, it was seen. In Harlem, artists took to the canvas with purpose and power. They painted what hadn't been painted before. Black life, Black beauty, Black history through Black eyes, not as subjects of study or caricature, but as creators of culture, as storytellers of their own. Aaron Douglas led the way. A quiet man with bold vision. Douglas blended African motifs with modernist style, geometric forms, layered silhouettes, radiant lines that pulsed with energy. His murals didn't just hang on walls, they told epics. From the sorrow of slavery to the pride of resistance, his art mapped the journey of a people rising. In aspects of Negro life, he captured it all. Dancers in motion, men in chains, a hand reaching upward toward light. His figures were faceless but not nameless. They were everyone. They were ancestors. They were hope. Palmer Hayden painted the working class, barbers, fishermen, everyday people in ordinary moments. Archibald Motley brought Black nightlife to vibrant life with crowded scenes of jazz clubs, laughter, and light bouncing off polished shoes and smiling faces. Meanwhile, in dark rooms across Harlem, photographers like James Van Der Zee captured a different kind of beauty, real beauty. His portraits showed Black families dressed in their finest, newlyweds holding hands, soldiers in uniform, children standing proudly beside their parents. Van Der Zee gave Harlem its mirror, one that reflected dignity, joy, pride, and sorrow. He saw the sacred in the everyday and framed it with reverence. Visual art during the Harlem Renaissance was never just about aesthetics. It was declaration. It was correction. It was truth. Artists reclaimed their image from centuries of distortion. No longer mammies and minstrels. No longer anonymous laborers or faceless shadows. Now they were kings, queens, mothers, scholars, lovers, dancers, rebels, and saints. Every brushstroke was a protest against invisibility. Every photograph was a sentence in a story never allowed to be told. Art was no longer trapped in galleries or elite hands. It was sewn into Harlem's fabric on church walls, in shop windows, in community centers, in the pages of magazines. The canvas was wide, and Harlem's artists filled it, not with fantasy, but with truth made visible. While jazz filled the air and poetry lit up the page, something deeper moved beneath Harlem's Renaissance, an awakening of political purpose. For centuries, Black people had been told to shrink themselves, to be invisible, to survive quietly. But in Harlem, pride was becoming a public stance. And with that pride came politics, not in the form of party lines, but in the form of identity, power, and refusal. W.E.B. Du Bois, the scholar and activist, had long believed in the uplift of the talented 10th, the most educated and accomplished Black individuals who could lead the way forward. He saw the Harlem Renaissance as proof that the race had greatness to offer, not someday, but now. He urged artists to use their gifts not just for beauty, but for justice. He believed that art should serve a purpose, elevate the race, challenge white supremacy, and shine light on truths too long ignored. But not everyone agreed. Younger artists like Langston Hughes pushed back against the idea that black art had to behave. Hughes wanted freedom to write about the poor, the struggling, the joyful, the angry. "We know we are beautiful," he wrote, "and ugly too." For him, the politics of pride was about showing all of it, the full, messy, glorious humanity of black life. Then came Marcus Garvey. Where Du Bois focused on integration and uplift, Garvey dreamed of independence. Through his movement, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, he preached self-reliance, economic strength, and a return to African roots. Garvey's message resonated. His parades filled the streets. His red, black, and green flag became a symbol of global black identity. He spoke of ships, of black-owned industry, of shaking free from systems that would never accept them. Together, these voices, Du Bois, Hughes, Garvey, and countless others, didn't always agree, but they created a chorus. And in Harlem, that chorus was loud, brilliant, and unignorable. Because the Harlem Renaissance wasn't just a cultural movement, it was a political one, a movement that didn't ask for a seat at the table. It built its own, and beneath every note, every brushstroke, every word written by candlelight was a steady rising drumbeat. We exist. We matter. We are. In the spotlight of Harlem's stage, a new kind of woman stood tall, brilliant, bold, and unafraid. She was more than a muse or a background character. She was a scholar, a singer, a sculptor, a storyteller. She didn't ask to be included. She declared her presence. And in doing so, she helped shape the Renaissance itself. Zora Neale Hurston was one of its brightest flames, a folklorist, novelist, and unapologetic voice of the rural South. Zora brought black dialect, myth, and rhythm into literature with fearless clarity. Where others reached for polish, she reached for truth. Her characters spoke like the people she grew up with. They sang, they laughed, they fought, and they lived. In Their Eyes Were Watching God, she gave readers a heroine who found her voice not through love, but through loss, through land, through herself. Zora studied anthropology at Barnard College, the only black student there. She traveled the South recording songs, traditions, and stories that had never been written down. She treated black culture not as a curiosity, but as a legacy, one to be honored, one to be preserved. She wasn't alone. In Paris, Josephine Baker electrified European audiences. Barefoot and fierce, she danced with joy and rebellion. Her performances were playful and political, mocking the very stereotypes others tried to impose. Offstage, she became a spy during World War II, smuggling secrets for the French resistance. Back in the States, women like Ma Rainey and Bessie Smith gave voice to pain, pleasure, and power through the blues. Their lyrics were raw. Their presence was undeniable. They sang not for approval, but for release, for themselves and every woman who had loved hard and lived harder. Women of the Harlem Renaissance also organized. They led clubs, published essays, hosted salons. They fought for women's rights while confronting racism within the broader feminist movement. They carved their own path through art and activism alike. These women were not accessories to the Renaissance. They were architects of it. They redefined what it meant to be black and female, unbound, unfiltered, and unashamed. And in every word, every note, every painted line, they left a message echoing through time. I will not be silenced. I am the story, too. When the sun dipped below the Manhattan skyline and the street lamps flickered on, Harlem transformed. By day, it was a city of workers and thinkers, families and artists. But by night, Harlem came alive in a different way. A rhythm that pulsed beneath the surface in smoke-filled clubs, crowded ballrooms, and late-night whispers. The music didn't stop when darkness fell. It got louder, bolder, sweatier. The Cotton Club was one of the most famous venues, lavish, glittering, and segregated. White patrons sat in tuxedos and pearls, sipping gin, while black performers gave them the night of their lives. Duke Ellington ruled the stage, his fingers commanding every key, Dancers flew across the floor like lightning. Voices rose over brass and beat. The irony was sharp. Black bodies on the stage, banned from the seats. But the performers owned the room in their own way. They dazzled. They dominated. They created something so magnetic that even racism couldn't look away. Elsewhere, the Savoy Ballroom told a different story. It was the people's place. No velvet rope, no segregation. Here, black and white dancers mingled freely. Lindy hoppers spun in wide circles, skirts twirling, shoes sliding. The floor was alive with joy. The music was louder here, raw, closer to the ground. Beyond the dance halls, Harlem's nightlife included back alley speakeasies, upstairs jazz dens, and apartment gatherings where strangers became friends over records and wine. These weren't just parties, they were performances, rituals of release. In a world that tried to keep black people quiet, Harlem at night was a place to laugh loudly, move freely, and claim space. Writers came too, Langston Hughes scribbling poems on napkins, musicians trading verses between sets, painters sketched by candlelight, philosophers debated over bourbon and smoke. Every evening held the promise of art being born in real time. But Harlem's nights weren't just glitter and music, they also revealed tensions between fame and exploitation, celebration and survival. There were performers paid pennies for brilliance, dancers who worked until dawn, then woke at noon to clean hotel rooms. Behind the glamour was grit. Still, something electric lived in those hours. Something that said, we are alive, we are brilliant, we will shine. Especially when the world goes dark. And shine they did. In Harlem, even getting dressed was an act of defiance. Every collar, every hat tilt, every flash of color was more than fashion. It was a statement. Style wasn't just about beauty. It was about power, about being seen in a world that tried to make black people invisible. Men wore zoot suits, broad shoulders, high waists, long jackets that flowed when they walked. It wasn't subtle, that was the point. These were clothes that took up space. That said, I belong here. Shoes were polished to mirrors, hats angled just right. Even the strut down Lenox Avenue carried intention, a rhythm all its own. Women embraced elegance and boldness. Bright lipsticks, silk blouses, tailored dresses with intricate beadwork. Hair was sculpted, straightened, curled. Some wore head wraps, others let their natural curls shine. Style was a personal canvas where tradition met modernity. And whether they worked in clubs or cleaned houses by day, Harlem women walked the streets with heads high and hips swinging. But it went deeper than clothing. Language became art. Slang, dialect, code switching, all were tools of resistance. Young people invented new ways of speaking, twisting words with wit, rhythm, and soul. They didn't just adapt English, they reimagined it. Whether in the cadence of a poem or the snap of conversation, every syllable was layered with history and pride. Even silence had its power. A raised eyebrow, a paused breath, a hand placed firmly on a hip. These too were part of the performance. Nonverbal declarations that said, you may overlook me, but I see myself clearly. In beauty salons and barbershops, community temples in their own right, style was passed down, shared, sharpened. One person's swagger lifted another's confidence. One woman's bright scarf became the spark for a dozen others to wear theirs with pride. Harlem's style traveled. It rippled into Chicago, Detroit, London, and Paris. It influenced painters, photographers, and filmmakers. It whispered into the threads of future revolutions, because to dress beautifully in a country that denied your worth was more than vanity. It was protest. To walk with confidence was political. To show joy was resistance. And in every feather, every heel, every flash of gold, Harlem reminded the world, we are not hiding, we are dazzling. By the early 1930s, the Renaissance began to dim. The Great Depression tightened its grip, silencing nightclubs, scattering artists, and draining the lifeblood from Harlem's cultural economy. Funding dried up, publishers backed away, the glamorous shine faded under the weight of poverty and hardship. But the flame didn't die, it changed shape. What had begun in brownstone basements and candlelit salons now lived in memory, in literature, in music, passed from hand to hand. The Harlem Renaissance had planted seeds deep, stubborn, and glowing beneath the surface of American life. Its writers became mentors, its musicians became legends, its painters became history's mirrors, and its message of dignity, expression, resistance, and pride never left. The poets of the Renaissance whispered through the verses of the civil rights era. You can hear Langston Hughes in the words of Maya Angelou, in the cadence of Nikki Giovanni. You can feel the defiance of Claude McKay in the speeches of Malcolm X and the rhythms of Gil Scott-Heron. The style, the music, the energy, it echoed in Motown, in soul, in jazz clubs and hip-hop ciphers. It danced across the stages of Broadway and spoke boldly from pages taught in classrooms across the world. Even today, Harlem remains a sacred space, a monument not of marble, but of memory. Walking through its streets is like walking through time. The Apollo Theater still stands, echoing with generations of voices. Murals, bookstores, and community gardens carry on the creative spark. The Renaissance proved something that no system, no prejudice, no silence could erase. That Black life in America is not something to pity or fear, but something to celebrate. It showed the world the power of culture to shape history, and it reminded a people long denied their voice that their voice was the story. Not a side note, not a footnote, the story. So as the night draws in and the music softens in the background, remember this. The Harlem Renaissance was not a moment. It was a declaration. And that declaration still echoes in every bold word, in every proud step, in every new creation born from truth. Because Harlem didn't just create a renaissance, it created a legacy, and that legacy lives on in all of us. Alas, it is dawn on August 24th, 79 AD. The sun rises slowly over Pompeii, washing the city in soft golden light. Shadows stretch across cobbled streets as shopkeepers unlatch their shutters and sweep yesterday's dust into the gutters. The distant sound of metal striking stone echoes through the forum. Blacksmiths already at work. Inside a bakery near the Temple of Apollo, the fire in the oven is stoked, and fresh loaves are arranged for sale. The smell of warm bread mixes with crushed olives, garlic, and the sharp bite of fermenting wine. In the stables, donkeys shuffle and bray, eager for water. In one of the wealthier villas, a mosaicist arranges colored tiles on a half-finished floor, humming softly to himself. Pompeii is alive. Children splash each other at a public fountain. A fruit seller slices figs for a customer. 2 Roman soldiers off duty lounge near a tavern door, drinking watered-down wine and laughing at the heat already rising from the stone. Overhead, laundry sways gently between buildings on long cords, dancing lazily in the morning breeze. But not everything is as it seems. Above them all, Mount Vesuvius stands tall, quiet, looming, ancient. This morning, thin white wisps rise faintly from its peak. They disappear quickly into the sky. To most, it's nothing. A curious cloud, a morning haze. Earthquakes had rattled the region days before, but nothing unusual. This land is known to move. The people of Pompeii live with the mountain. They trust it. They do not fear it. In a shaded garden, a young woman picks herbs, basil, mint, thyme. Her sandals crunch on gravel as she moves from bed to bed. She doesn't notice the silence above her. Birds have fled. The bees are gone. The air feels heavier as if the sky is holding its breath. A slave in a nearby household glances up at the mountain, frowning. He senses something, but before he can dwell on it, he's called back inside. Water to fetch, floors to scrub, life to live. And so Pompeii continues. The morning flows forward as if the earth itself has not already begun to shift, as if time itself hasn't already decided to stop. By nightfall, the morning grows warmer. By 8:30 a.m., the sun is high over Pompeii, and the streets hum with movement. Shoppers haggle over dates and lentils in the bustling Macellum. The scent of fish and vinegar drifts through the air. Slaves haul buckets of water from public fountains. Children chase each other around columns. Everything feels ordinary. And yet, not quite. Something in the air has shifted. The ground gives a soft tremor beneath the feet, not enough to knock anything over, just enough to pause conversation. A moment of uncertainty. Then, like a breeze, the moment passes and people go on. Earthquakes are common here. The mountain has always stirred. Still, the signs grow louder if one knows how to listen. At the temple of Isis, the priestess stops mid-prayer. A jug on the altar rattles gently, almost imperceptibly. She narrows her eyes at the smoke rising from the incense. It swirls strangely, caught in a breeze that isn't there. She says nothing, but she feels something ancient shifting. In a courtyard garden near the city's edge, a dog whines and claws at the door. It's tied up as always, but today it pulls harder. The woman of the house frowns at the ash on her steps. Ash. It must be from a neighbor's fire, she thinks. She brushes it away and continues with her day. By 10 a.m., the tremors become more frequent. Small rolling quakes every half hour. A crack forms in the side of a wall near the amphitheater. No one sees it happen. A merchant blames the crack on age and time. But the time is now, and age is no longer the culprit. Up on Vesuvius, white vapor thickens into a dark gray column. It stretches upward, slow but constant. Faint rumbles echo down the slope. The goats have scattered. The air smells faintly of sulfur. By noon, ash begins to fall. Light at first, like snowflakes, but warm to the touch. They land on rooftops, float into open jars, dust the shoulders of market-goers. Some stop and look up. They squint at the sun, which now glows through a thin veil of gray. The mountain is speaking, but Pompeii still isn't listening. It begins without warning. At exactly 12:02 p.m., the summit of Mount Vesuvius explodes. A thunderclap tears through the sky so loud it shatters windows in Pompeii and is heard as far away as Misenum across the bay. The mountain doesn't just tremble, it opens. A plume of ash, pumice, and rock shoots violently into the air, reaching nearly 20 kilometers high in a matter of minutes. The force turns daylight into dusk. From Pompeii's streets, it looks like the sky itself is breaking apart. At the Forum, people scream and scatter. Birds, what few remain, vanish into the blackening sky. Above them, the sun dims, casting an eerie bronze glow across the city. The column of ash climbs higher and higher, forming what Pliny the Younger would later call a pine tree of smoke. Thick at the base, branching at the top, small rocks begin to rain down. Pumice, porous, sharp, and hot. They bounce off tiled roofs and sting exposed skin. At first, the hail is light, but it gains weight. It gains speed. Soon, the streets are covered in gray. Inside homes, people look to the gods. Some gather their families and rush toward the city gates. Others retreat deeper inside, believing the walls will protect them. One woman clutches her jewelry and rushes to the basement. A baker, covered in flour, grabs a sack of coins and locks the door behind him. But there is no safety. The ash begins to choke the air. People wrap cloth around their mouths. Their eyes sting. Their lungs tighten. The city's once bright marble becomes coated in soot. Statues of gods disappear under a falling sky. At the harbor, the sea pulls back unnaturally, then crashes back in violent waves. Ships rock and break from their moorings. Some attempt to flee by boat, but the winds whip wildly. Visibility fades. Water turns black. In the hills, a farmer watches in silence as the mountain roars and the heavens rain stone. Time begins to fracture. Minutes feel like hours. The rhythm of life, once measured by the clang of market stalls and temple bells, is replaced by coughing, screaming, and silence. Pompeii does not know it yet, but the countdown has begun. By 1 p.m., the city of Pompeii is unrecognizable. Ash falls like rain, thick and suffocating. The ground is hidden beneath a rising blanket of gray. Roofs begin to sag under the growing weight of pumice. The streets are no longer roads, they are rivers of dust and stone. Panic sets in. Citizens rush to the city gates, the Porta Marina, the Porta Nola. Each one becomes a choke point as carts, animals, and people collide in frantic waves. Horses rear and buck. Children scream for parents, slaves run alongside masters. Class forgotten in the shadow of the mountain. Inside homes, the light has disappeared. Even at midday, the interior rooms are lit only by oil lamps flickering dimly through curtains of dust. Some families choose to hide. They shut windows, brace doors, and pray that the storm will pass. Others decide to flee, grabbing whatever valuables they can carry. Coins, amulets, silverware, household gods. The air grows thicker by the minute. People press cloth to their mouths, but the ash finds its way in. Breathing becomes a struggle. For the elderly and the very young, it is almost impossible. Some collapse in the streets, coughing, unable to go on. A man helps his pregnant wife down an alley, one arm shielding her head, the other carrying a small bronze statue of Minerva. Nearby, a group of teenagers tries to climb onto the city walls, hoping for a better view or perhaps a way out. They stop laughing when a nearby roof caves in with a deep, heavy crash. At the baths, steam mixes with volcanic dust. The air is thick and unbreathable. Water becomes cloudy with ash. Those inside stumble out, wrapped in towels, unsure whether to run or return. Farther out in the fields, some who fled early look back toward Pompeii and weep. The city is cloaked in black. The massive column of smoke towers above it like a curse. Lightning cracks within the ash cloud, painting the sky in flashes of orange and blue. It is no longer a disaster. It is a burial in progress, and Vesuvius has only begun to exhale. By mid-afternoon, Pompeii is disappearing. Stone by stone, breath by breath, the ashfall no longer drifts gently. It crashes down in waves, driven by shifting winds and the mountain's furious breath. By now, over a meter of pumice covers the streets. Doors cannot open. Windows cannot close. The weight of the sky has settled on the city, and it shows no sign of lifting. The roofs begin to fail. The first collapse comes at a villa near the House of the Thorn. The roof gives way with a low, aching groan, then crashes inward with terrifying speed. Dust bursts outward. The home's frescoes vanish beneath rubble. Statues fall. A slave girl trapped in the atrium has no time to scream. It is not the last. All across Pompeii, walls shudder and beams snap. In a workshop, a merchant tries to shield his goods with a sheet of cloth before the upper floor caves in. In a bakery, an oven still glows faintly, but the ceiling above it sags dangerously. No one is left to feed the fire. The city grows darker. Ash clogs the oil lamps, dims their flames. The air turns gritty and bitter. It coats mouths, nostrils, and lungs. Breathing is shallow, wheezing. People now move not to escape, but to find air. Just a pocket, just a breath. The silence is broken only by the crashing of buildings, the coughing of the trapped, and the rumble of Vesuvius far above. The world has shrunk to shadows and ash. Some residents retreat underground into storerooms and wine cellars. There they huddle in pitch darkness, hoping the stone above them will hold. Mothers wrap their arms around their children. Some clutch keys, hoping to return to homes that are already gone. Others hold nothing at all, just the hands of those they love. Outside, time slows. The ash is now knee-deep. Streets are silent. The fountains have stopped flowing. The statues of the gods are buried up to their shoulders, their marble faces streaked with soot. Pompeii is still alive, but barely. Its heart beats slower now. And above it all, Mount Vesuvius continues to rumble, preparing something even worse than ash. The ash has fallen for hours now. Pompeii is half buried, suffocating, silent. Then the mountain changes. At 5:30 p.m., Mount Vesuvius gives a low, guttural roar, different from before. It is not an explosion, it is a release. Something deep inside has cracked. A moment later, the first pyroclastic surge breaks loose. It is not lava, it is worse. A dense cloud of superheated gas, ash, and pulverized rock rushes down the slope. Over 700 degrees Celsius, faster than wind. A gray avalanche that flows like water and burns like fire. It hits the neighboring town of Herculaneum first, swallowing it whole in under 5 minutes. People are flash-heated to death where they stand. Bodies do not fall. They are frozen upright, carbonized in an instant. Skulls fracture from the steam expanding within. The surge is so fast no one has time to run. Pompeii is still, but it can feel the change. The air already thick with ash grows hotter. Sulfur hangs heavy in every breath. A second tremor shakes the city. Columns tilt. A bronze statue topples with a metallic crash. Those still alive can now see the glowing red rim around the mountain. They hear the sound of boiling earth like thunder rolling from beneath their feet. A few try to run again, but it's too late. Roads are gone. Homes are sealed. Escape is impossible. A boy clutches his father's tunic. They stand in a stairwell beneath a collapsed roof. He asks if the gods are angry. The man does not answer. He doesn't know. By 6:30 p.m., thick black clouds blot out even the faintest hint of daylight. Ash now reaches the shoulders of statues, the tops of market stalls. Fires burn in several buildings, their flames dimmed by smoke. And then silence, brief, complete, terrifying. The first pyroclastic surge has not yet reached Pompeii, but it is close. The mountain has changed the rules. What began as ash and fear is now something else, something final. Above the rooftops, the sky glows red and pulses with lightning. The mountain is no longer a distant danger. It is a living god, and it is coming. Pompeii has hours left, maybe, but the mercy of time is fading. Darkness has swallowed Pompeii completely. There is no moon, no stars, no flame that can pierce the weight of ash in the air. Only the soft red flicker from distant fires reflects off the ash-covered walls. The city no longer breathes. It waits. Between 7 and 10 p.m., the silence becomes unbearable. Those still alive speak in whispers. Voices are from the dust. Eyes burn. Chests ache. Most have stopped trying to flee. There is nowhere to go. The gates are blocked. The sea is choked with debris. The streets are impossible, filled with hot, shifting ash that rises to the waist. In a once elegant villa near the Street of Abundance, a young woman lights a single oil lamp. She kneels beside her father, who can no longer stand. He presses a pendant into her hand, his final gift. In the garden beside them, statues of Venus and Apollo lean sideways, half buried. Elsewhere, a mother huddles beneath the stairs with her son. She hums a lullaby, trying to calm him, though her voice shakes. The boy is quiet, not because he isn't afraid, but because he is. Fear has become normal. Breathing is the only thing left to do, and even that is fading. In the stables, a dog lies twisted in its chain, claw marks deep in the ground. It had tried to free itself, but the ash came too quickly. By 8:45 p.m., tremors return, heavier, deeper. The ground groans under the weight of pressure building within the volcano. Walls buckle. Another roof caves in near the temple. Dust sprays upward. A pillar collapses into a courtyard, shattering with a final echo. People now crouch in silence. There are no more plans, no more directions, only moments. One breath, another. Pompeii's final witnesses are still. Some kneel in prayer, others lie flat, arms shielding their faces. A few hold hands, lips moving softly in darkness. No more screams, just breath and stone. At 9:50 p.m., the glow above the mountain changes. Brighter, redder. The second pyroclastic surge begins to form. Faster, heavier, deadlier. The final moments are here, and Pompeii, bruised and blind, does not cry out. It simply braces for whatever comes next. At 10:15 p.m., the mountain breaks. The second pyroclastic surge explodes from the flanks of Vesuvius with no warning. It is not a wave, it is a wall. A roaring mass of gas, ash, molten rock, and invisible death surges down the slopes at over 100 miles per hour. It does not burn. It vaporizes, it does not knock, it crushes. This time it reaches Pompeii. In one terrifying moment, the entire city is engulfed. The surge races through gates, alleys, gardens, and temples, smashing everything in its path. The temperature reaches beyond 400 degrees Celsius. Wood ignites instantly. Bodies are flash burned. No time to run, no time to think. Only stillness. People are frozen where they fell. A man reaching for his wife, a mother shielding her child, a priest with his hands still raised in prayer. The heat robs breath before the lungs can exhale. Muscles lock. Ash hardens around forms, leaving voids in the shape of final gestures. Structures collapse all at once. Ceilings fall. Walls crumble. The forum is buried beneath debris. Even marble statues begin to crack and blister from the heat. Fountains dry mid-flow, ash filling their basins like a last offering. The surge takes less than a minute to erase the city. Then silence. A silence that does not feel like peace. It is too deep, too absolute. It is the sound of finality, of something vast and ancient completing its terrible task. The mountain groans once more, then settles. Pompeii is gone. No smoke rises from chimneys. No voices echo in the streets. No feet walk across the forum stones. The ash lies thick and still, a city perfectly preserved beneath 10 feet of volcanic dust, caught not in ruin, but in pause. The winds shift gently over the plain, carrying the last of the sulfur east. The stars return to the sky, but there is no one to see them. All that remains is shape, position, posture, the frozen choreography of people who had no time to say goodbye. And above them, Mount Vesuvius looms, quiet now, emptied of fury, crowned in steam. But deep beneath that stillness, Pompeii sleeps, waiting. Midnight passes. The eruption slows. What was once a roar has become a murmur, distant, almost tired. Vesuvius exhales smoke into the black sky, but its fire has gone. Pompeii lies beneath it now, utterly still. There are no more screams, no more footsteps, no prayers, no winds to carry them. Only ash, heavy and unmoving. Beneath this blanket, the city sleeps. Temples remain standing, half covered, their gods silenced by stone. Amphorae lie untouched in kitchens. Loaves of bread sit fossilized in ovens. Tables are still set. Coins rest in drawers beside forgotten dreams. Time has stopped, but everything has remained exactly where it was, frozen in its last heartbeat. No one comes to search. Not for days, not for years. Eventually, not for centuries. Nature reclaims the regions slowly. Vines creep over broken columns. The earth cools. New trees root in the ash. Grass grows where Pompeian voices once echoed. The name Pompeii fades from maps, from memory, from history. Other cities rise, empires fall, the mountain sleeps again. And then, 1,700 years later, the silence breaks. In 1748, during routine excavation, workmen strike something unexpected. Painted walls, bright, delicate, preserved. They dig deeper. Rooms appear. Skeletons, mosaics, streets. Pompeii begins to awaken. Historians, artists, and archaeologists come to the buried city like pilgrims. They brush ash from frescoes. They cast the empty voids left by human bodies, filling them with plaster, revealing forms caught in the moment of death. A man curled on a stair, a girl clutching her necklace, a dog straining against its chain. We do not see ruins, we see life interrupted. Pompeii becomes more than a tragedy. It becomes a mirror, a time capsule, a reminder that joy, fear, beauty, and loss all coexist in a single breath. That a city can disappear in one night and still whisper across 2 millennia. Today, we walk the same streets. We stand in doorways where others once lived and loved. We stare into plaster faces shaped by fire and silence. And we imagine their voices. They are gone, but they are not forgotten. Because sometimes the past is not lost. It is simply waiting. And in the quiet gray of volcanic ash, Pompeii still remembers.